Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Catching-101 TV. My name is Zan Barksdale. I'll be your host for the show. Really excited as always. I'm excited when I have guests on, but today I'm really excited and I'm honored to have the person we're going to pick his brain and get some knowledge out of. Of all the people in the baseball world, this is one of the guys that I think I'm most impressed by. Alan Jaeger, as you guys will find out, he's become well known in the throwing community, but he's also really well known for his thoughts on the mental game as well. And in today's landscape of baseball, it seems like most people have a very singular focus. They're a catching guy, a hitting guy, a pitching guy, and they're not really taught to go outside their lane. But Alan has been fantastic. The information he puts out, he's become known as a thought leader in a couple different areas of baseball, which is really spectacular and very kind of unusual. And I'd be willing to bet that everybody who's listening or watching is 1 degree of separation away from Alan. He's created the J bands, which I don't think you can go to a field in America and not find players using J bands before, during, or after the games. He's also written the book, The Year-Round Throwing Manual, and his DVD that came out years ago, which I've purchased both of them, Thrive on Throwing. So, Alan, excited to have you. Can't wait to talk to you about a little bit of baseball today.
Hey, Zan, number one, thanks for having me on. Number two, possibly the best intro ever, man. Top 3 for sure, but whatever I paid you, I didn't pay you enough, man. So thank you. And honestly, as you know, it is a total honor for me to be on with you because I know what you've brought to the baseball community, and you're a leader in the catching world and obviously beyond the catching world. So I'm thrilled to be on this, and I'm just thrilled to be able to, hopefully, between the two of us, just share some good information that's going to help impact some careers. Because at the end of the day, I think that's really why we do what we do.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I will send you an invoice for the other half of the intro
yes.
fee.
No, yeah, the check's in the mail on that other invoice too.
Yeah, there you go. Honestly, so like I said before, I'm super excited to talk. I think today, honestly, the biggest challenge is going to be cutting this thing off at an hour or hour and 10 minutes, because I know every time we talk on the phone, it seems like we can just go on and on and on. So I'm going to try to be deliberate about what I ask you so I don't take up all of your day. But before we get into that, in case somebody is watching for the first time or they've not heard of you before, which I would find hard to believe, but I would love for you to go ahead and just tell a little bit about your background, and also where people can find you. Again, like I mentioned earlier, you have books and J bands and videos and a lot of free resources on your website. If you would please just go ahead and let people know a little bit about your background, and then also where they can kind of find you online.
Yeah, let's see. I'd say to keep it simple, I last played at Cal State Northridge out here in Los Angeles. And really it was when I was a junior at Cal State Northridge. Ironically, my business partner, Jim Batcher, I was a pitcher, he was an outfielder. It's amazing. I was a walk-on junior, he was one of the captains. It's just amazing how we found each other because we both wanted to throw basically as far as we could every day, give or take. I mean, I was a pitcher, I had to monitor it a bit, but we pretty much stretched it out from what I remember each day. And in fact, the whole team had to wait for us until the two of us were done. Now, not because of a walk-on junior college transfer, but because Jim was an outfielder who, oh, by the way, at one point was voted best arm in the PCL as a 5'9" outfielder, which tells you what kind of arm he had. He wasn't like a 6'3" guy throwing with natural downhill plane. And to me, that was sort of symbolic of the throwing part for me, that here was the head coach. Literally, they were waiting there because Jim was influencing games on defense. He was throwing people out during games. And so the coach was going to wait until we were done. And that was sort of cool. But giving you a little more background into the mental part of the game, which is really where I started, I went through a very tough situation as a junior, and so that led me, really into why was I going through such a hard time. I actually had to leave the team, and it's a really long story, but basically, it was the lightning rod in my life that got me into what is going on with me mentally. And so again, long story short, is I got heavy into meditation. I got heavy into the mental game, and eventually that led me into things like Zen and Eastern philosophy. And so then I wrote a book called Getting Focused, Staying Focused, back in 1990 through about 1995. And so, well, technically 94. So I would say that that sort of was a mishmash of the throwing. I was a pitching coach for 3 years at a junior college, Mission Junior College, and part of 1 year at College of the Canyons. And then about 1994, with my book coming out and sort of doing private lessons on the side as a pitching coach, and then I studied yoga. I kind of merged those three things together, started doing camps and clinics, and then we started doing speaking, wherever we could. And I think that was sort of the genesis, if you will, of Jaeger Sports and where we're at now.
Well, a great story for sure. And I know I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about all the stuff that's impacted your thoughts and the way you coach things. I'll put your social media handles on the screen, but if you would, please just let people know where to find you if they want to follow up, or maybe if they wanted to reach out for more information or some of your products.
Super easy, at Jaeger Sports, Jaeger, in the word sports, both Twitter and Instagram. Our website's jaegersports.com. And as you said, one thing we love to do is put out a lot of free content. So there's articles on there, there's stuff you can track down on YouTube. We've done a number of podcasts. A throwing one I think of jumps out of me right away is with Eric Cressy. So that's on our website. And then a mental game podcast I just love with Jeremy Sheetinger. Everybody knows the Sheets. We did a deep dive, almost 3 hours, which I know is a long time. But I mean, if you really want to go to school and take a little mini course or a major course in the mental game, and also, we really went through like guided meditation or guided, how do you bring mental practice into your daily plan if you're a coach and you've never done it before, and we walk you through it. So I just say up front, Zan, those are really our key resources, and a lot of the stuff is free and just pretty easy to find.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm sure, like I said, I'll link it below, and I'm sure people will follow up and go check that out. And I want to get into the mental game stuff, but kind of before we get into that, I'd like to really focus on throwing. And there are definitely some micro and very specific questions I've got, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on. But before we kind of talk about that, I'd like to set the stage with maybe some of your thoughts on a macro level about just throwing in general and baseball players and what the schedule demands now. I know personally one of the questions I get asked most commonly by parents is, Zan, how often should my son throw? How much time should we take off in the winter? Should we continue to throw? Should we not continue to throw? So again, I know that's very vague and very general, but just on a kind of macro overview, knowing what the landscape of baseball looks like right now, where it's very easy to throw year round between showcases and fall ball teams and high schools and then summer or colleges or whatever it may be. I'd love to kind of know your overarching thoughts on, what most players need to do or what a yearly schedule should look like.
Yeah, it's a really important start, Zan. Actually, it's perfect because really the macros where I hope people resonate with this, and that is, yes, there's a time and a place to rest, especially the younger kids. I totally get it. They're more supple. It's just a lot easier if they take off a couple of months if you're a 9-year-old or an 11-year-old. And I still would say do some light band work, maybe 3 days a week, even at that age. But if you need to get away from baseball because you want to play a different sport, that's fine. I don't know the real cutoff. We can go to, like people talk about, when you start shaving or 12, well, you don't start shaving at 13, but you start showing growth. I don't know the number, but I would my gut's always been around 13, 14. Once you start getting to middle school, I would say, especially if you're playing, summer ball and you're competing maybe throughout the year, as you said, our mantra is pretty much, feed the arm, right? Use it or lose it. Now, again, does it mean you can't take off a 6-week block or even an 8-week block? Sure, but here's maybe one of the biggest terms I hope people take away from this podcast today. Active rest. That's a term I stole from Eric Cressy years ago. It's one of my favorite terms talking about arm care. Because even if you don't pick up a ball, you could do band work 7 days a week. You can do band work 6 days a week. You can do band work maybe 3 days a week, I'd say at least. But if you're just doing something to keep the fire burning, keep the oven warm, it's miraculous what that effect has by bridging to times when you're ready to get back in shape. So I would say number one, yes, you don't have to throw your round. And yes, you can take off time, especially for the younger kids. But again, once you hit maybe 13, 14 years old, if it's my kid, I guess that's the way I would look at it. I don't know if I'd ever have him not throwing or doing band work for more than a 3 to 4 week period at one shot throughout the year. Now, as you know, there's many nuances. We could talk about someone that's playing a lot of games in the spring and they're playing games in the summer. And now we're looking at someone, especially a pitcher, maybe catchers who throw a ton too. Maybe we're saying, okay, maybe you really do need a month of just shutting down and doing nothing, not even bands, because you just need to give your arm a full break. I don't know the answer. I would definitely follow people like Eric Cressy on stuff like that. But I'm going to give you my instincts. I've been doing this for 31 years. I've been throwing I go back to throwing a baseball much further than that. And I would just say that for the most part, look, number one, listen to your arm. That's our number one rule of our throwing program. Always listen to your arm. It'll tell you where you need to be. But number two, I would probably err on the side of, if you just did some band work, maybe in some other arm care, maybe 3 days a week as a worst case scenario, even if you take off 3 months, and I'm not saying you should, but I'm just sort of saying that is maybe the takeaway, is this concept of active rest.
Yeah, and I love the term feed the arm, like you talk about. Each time I have a camp, and people who are watching, maybe they've heard me say it before, but I always ask the players there, say, hey guys, which group, when I was a college coach, which group of players do you think we saw the most arm issues with? And I don't necessarily always mean arm injuries. I don't mean Tommy Johns or torn labrums, but just arm issues. And I would ask them, and nobody's ever gotten the answer right the first time. They say, oh, it's the pitchers, or it's the outfielders, the shortstop. They pick some group. And in my experience, which may not be the same for everybody, but in my experience, it's typically the younger players. It's the freshmen who are just not used to the volume of throwing that you're going to have as a college freshman. And I tell guys, when you move up from junior high to high school, the practices become longer, the practices become more intense, the season becomes more demanding. Well, when you move from high school to college, the same thing takes place. You're going to throw more, you're going to have less rest, you're going to be going more days a week. So it's more demanding. And then, of course, obviously, once you move from college or high school even to professional baseball, where you're playing over 140 games plus spring training, there is a ton of throwing that has to be done. And in my experience, most of the guys that have arm issues, again, not always injuries, but some issues, are the guys who just aren't able to handle the volume of throwing. And I would just love to kind of get your thoughts on that. Maybe you see things a little bit differently, or maybe you agree, but I'd love to know what you think.
Couldn't agree with you more. Volume is a word. It's funny. Active rest is one of those terms. I'd say volume is a term I've been throwing around maybe more often than just about any other word when it comes to arm health, arm endurance, arm conditioning, arm recovery, arm longevity. To me, volume is king. And as much as we want guys and gals to get out and throw as far as they can, whatever that means to them, but really stretch it out and air it out. To me, if you look at like our buildup to get an arm in shape, I'm sure we'll get into this at some point. It's a 3 to 4 week process away from high intent throwing. The high intent does come maybe week 3, week 4, but the point is that the first 2 weeks, I say this all the time, we're not so concerned with distance the first 2 weeks. We want to build what we call low impact reps, like we call it massage throwing. And we want to build that volume and let the distance come organically. So you may think day 3 of your throwing program, maybe you're only out to 90 feet, and it may not seem very far. maybe you're only out to 70 feet. But if you can go from like 4 minutes of day one to 7 minutes, and you really didn't go much further, that's sort of the mentality we want. So the idea is that you're really building volume. It's just the way the body loves to condition and build. If you go out for a run right now, well, your body's going to have a much better run if the first, I don't know, quarter mile, half mile, you do a walk into a faster walk, into a really light jog, into a little bit more of a jog. And now your body's like, man, I'm lubed up. I've just done this sequentially in a nice way, fluidly. And now everything's greased, everything's warm, everything's getting hot the right way. And now the body's ready to operate. And so to me, throwing is the same mentality. It is a volume build first. The distance is going to come, no question about it. But this is about a volume build.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I wasn't really planning on talking about volume quite this early in the podcast. I wanted to bring it up a little bit later, but I'd love to get your thoughts on, catchers. I think we throw more volume. Now, the intensity may be less than a starting pitcher who's going to throw 80 high intensity pitches or competitive pitches or competitive throws. As a catcher, as a guy who's, going to catch in the bullpen, and you're always throwing the ball back to the mound, and you're catching, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 days a week. You're going to have a lot of volume, even though it's not maximum level throws. You're not throwing it as hard as you can every single time. There is a lot of volume in there, and that's an area that I think a lot of people kind of get confused on, because I think a lot of people count all throws the same. Oh, well, if the pitcher threw 100 throws today, then the catcher threw it back 100 times, and that's not exactly accurate, but you get the point. And there's really, I think it's a big difference. So for a parent, or for somebody who's coaching younger catchers who they're playing on weekend tournaments, and they have 3 games a day on a Saturday, and the catcher's making a lot of these, low impact, low intensity throws. What are your thoughts kind of, just around that side of it? Should guys do anything different than a separate position player? Should they treat themselves more like a pitcher with a very structured pregame and postgame routine? Just what would your advice be for a catcher who has a very high volume of throws, even though it's always not the highest intensity?
Well, it's a great question, Zan. I think it's going to be one of the most important questions that you asked today, because when I've dealt with catchers, and I really think about, as you said, they get a lot of reps, obviously, in throughout the day. To me, it's one of those things about, you have to get ahead of the game on this. And what I mean by that is, if you start from the premise of, wow, I've got all these throws I'm making, and so I probably need to baby my arm, or I deal with this with relief pitchers too, by the way. You'll see there's a very strong correlation here. And with relief pitchers, what'll happen is they get into a mentality maybe of saving their arm for the game. And so they don't throw a whole lot. And what it does is it has the opposite effect on the arm, because you didn't condition it pregame like you could or should. And I don't mean 300 feet pulling down as hard as you can, but maybe it's 250, 270, 240, depending upon what you did the night before. And maybe there aren't even any pull downs. And most of the time, there's not going to be, unless you haven't been in the game for 3 or 4 days. The point is that if you stay conditioned, then you're going to have a great experience in the game. You're actually going to recover better the next day. You're going to get on a nice roll. You're going to actually maintenance well. Catchers, to me, are very similar. If you don't get ahead of the game by having a great base in place, in other words, it's like, do that 3 or 4 week build up to a T, to perfection, like 10th degree black belt Bruce Lee. I'll probably use that reference more than once today. So that your base is so healthy and strong that you are in a position now where, if you go out to play with your team on day 31 after your buildup, and you're going to do in and outs and pregame, and you're going to make tons of throws in the bullpen and tons of throws in the game, and maybe some throws down to second base, well, at least 7 to 9 of them. Well, here's the catch. If you are in great shape, well, then on day 31, even though you may think you need to throw a lot and sort of save the arm a little bit like the relief pitcher, the opposite happens. If you're used to going out to 250 to 300 feet on an average long toss day and you're used to pulling down, and because you're not throwing off a slope and you're not throwing breaking balls, your recovery period after a month of doing this program should be ridiculous. In fact, your arm is going to want to stretch out every day. It may back off pull downs a little bit depending upon what you did the day before or a week before. So here's the point. If I'm in great shape, when I go out to the field and I go out to 250 to 300, whatever my distance is, and then I pull down, because look, I'm going to pull down in pregame, right? I'm going to make some throws a second and want to pull down. So I need to get there, right? I need to be fully opened up, fully stretched out. I need to make some pull downs. And there's the answer. So now what happens is pregame, you're doing a full long toss, a full pull down. Now your arm is happy because it's been doing what it's been doing the last month, or at least the last week or two of that month. Now you go in a game, you're electric. You're happy. You can do whatever you want. That's the BP pitcher now. Why does a BP pitcher make 400 or 500 throws a day, 6 days a week for 40 years and not break down? You can handle those lower impact throws now, even if you make some high intent throws in pregame, even if you make some high intent throws, obviously, in the game, but your arm's ready for it. So now your arm's going to recover well. So I think the main takeaway, so we can, maybe get some more questions here, is that if you get ahead of the game and you get into such great shape, I hate to say it this simple, but you kind of are in, not that you're not working hard, but your arm now can just maintenance, like almost cruise control. It's just, and I'll give you one last example. My partner, again, who I mentioned earlier, Jim Batcher, when he got into pro ball, he was used to throwing at 300 plus every day, fully stretching out and fully pulling down. He did this every day of his career because his arm was built to do it. And also, when he got in the game, his arm would never be shocked. This was normal to him. People would come to him all the time. How do you throw so much before the game? Aren't you sore? Don't you ever get hurt? Jim's like, no. The only time, ironically, Jim had a sore arm in 15 years of professional baseball, maybe in his life, for all I know, is at one point the Phillies moved him to the infielder because he had a lot of power as an outfielder, and they wanted to maybe sneak him in as a second baseman and use the power there. So he started throwing with the infielders and getting out to 120 to 180 or whatever it was, and he immediately started having a sore arm. So my point is that he got into the mentality, which I believe is just normal. I know it sounds a little bit like, really? But if you train this way, it's sort of like, why do pitchers go out to 330 to 350 before a game? Doesn't that use up the arm? No. That's what they're trained to do. So I hope that helps, because to me, this is maybe one of the most crucial elements for a catcher who has to make more throws than anybody on a given day. And I don't want them getting to that mentality like saving the arm, protecting the arm. Well, if you don't get ahead of the game, yes, you start getting into that mode. And now, to me, you're vulnerable. Now you're putting yourself in risk. And so I would just say, get ahead of the game, get into such great shape that now you can cruise, whether it's a 1 month summer season or it's 6 months straight of spring into summer. It's not an issue. It's just more good stuff.
Well, that really hits home with me because I'm working with a few players right now, and they tell me, I played a tournament this weekend, and now I need to take a couple of days off to get ready for the next weekend tournament. And that's kind of going against what you're saying and what I believe in. Almost, again, to an extent, the more you throw, the better you'll be. Again, it's all relative. I'm not saying go out and throw 1,000 pitches a day, but the more often you throw, the more your arm is acclimated to throwing, the better off you'll be. And I understand where a lot of these, maybe young players are coming from. They have great intentions where they read online about rest and recovery and letting the body heal itself. But that doesn't mean you don't have to throw. It doesn't mean you just absolutely shut it down and play video games all day and do nothing. Throwing is beneficial. Again, in the off season, like you said, I love the idea of, instead of just taking time completely off, use your bands 3, 4, 7 days a week. I mean, I don't think that's detrimental at all. So definitely a lot of good points there. And I do want to move on to a couple of things, but my main takeaway from that is what you said is work really hard to get your arm in shape and then maintain it, which kind of leads me into the next thing I wanted to talk about. I know we've spoken before, you talk about a build-up period. So for a player who does want to, get their arm in shape, and I know right now it's the beginning of July, it's July 1st. So most players are in the middle of their season. But again, this fall here in another couple of months, once they finish summer ball or they finish, the professional season, they're going to go through a period where they're probably going to throw a little bit less, and then they go through that build up phase. So would you kind of go through what does your build up phase look like? As guys are returning to throwing after the off season, what does that look like? The 3 or 4 week period, where they're really trying to strengthen their arm, really trying to get it into shape where they can just, hold the maintenance for the rest of the season.
Yeah, great, man. Before I go there, because we're going to talk about target dates, which is really the key to this whole thing. You said something that was so interesting about the catchers that want to rest. I just have to comment real quickly on that, and then we'll put that to bed. To me, unless it's, again, 3, 4, 5 months into a season, grinding it out, or, playing, like if you're playing in the Cape or somewhere, you're playing 6 days a week. I get you're maybe worn down, excuse me, you need a rest. But to me, if you go back to the theory we just talked about, which is if you build it so well, you're just good to go. What happens is you actually wake up and you don't feel like you need a rest. In fact, you feel the opposite. Your arm is asking for work. It wants to work because it's used to working a lot. Your base is so good that what you do in the game doesn't really affect your base. If anything, it might strengthen your base. So you don't really feel like you need a rest or want a rest. That's the other real nuance to getting your arm in great shape. Once you get your arm in great shape, it's cool. You come to the field and it's begging for action. It wants to throw. Rest to me means someone who's just been doing it for 6 months, or goes back to the other scenario where I just feel like maybe they just weren't in really good shape to begin with. And so now they're working on a residual kind of formula, right? So I just want to make that clear. If you need rest, unless it's after a real long grind, it just says to me you're probably not in the kind of shape you should be in. So regarding the conditioning, the buildup, I would say for a position player, pitchers have so much to juggle and balance once bullpens start. If you're a position player, in fact, in our throwing manual, I address everybody at first and say, look, everybody, this is the 4-week buildup for everybody, pitchers, position players. But the cool thing with a position player is once the 4 weeks is done, now they just get to go in maintenance mode, which is sort of piggybacking on what we just talked about. They are such a beast if they do this right after 4 weeks. They are just, again, Bruce Lee 10th degree black belt. They are so strong that now it's almost like saying, oh, I'm going to play a little catch in the backyard. That's the mentality you start to get when you get into such great shape. And I'm not trying to downplay this, that catchers don't throw a lot. Of course they do. The build-up phase, the way I would look at it is this, because everybody is in a different part of the season. Now we're in the summer. So let's just address summer since we're there. And it is maybe the trickiest one because everybody's going back to school unless you're in pro ball. So, and the pros, as you know, have this great 4-month window where they can play with, deloading after the season, resting, active rest, build up. They've got plenty of time. The high school, college kids, it of course gets trickier. So for the summer, what I'd say is this. Pick your target date. This is like the most important thing I can say about getting your arm in optimal shape, to not only get in optimal shape, but to roll in optimal shape pretty much as long as you want until you really feel like you need to take a break again, which might be 6 months later. And this target date is important because if I know that September 15th, let's make it September 1st to make it easier, that my coach said, I better show up September 1st ready for, serious pregame infield and inter squads. And in other words, I need to be in shape to be pulling down with high intent. Well, then I know I need 4 weeks to get in great shape. Now, there's one caveat here. If you're in shape already, but you know you want to break, but you know you're not that far from getting out of shape, I understand where maybe you shut down, August 1st, give yourself 2 weeks off so you have a 2-week buildup rather than a 4-week buildup, because you don't need as much time because you're still sort of in shape. You haven't lost that much after 2 weeks. I would still say do some band work. But let's take the more extreme example where you're showing up again September 1st, and you know you need a break, but the games are going till August 1st. And I would say this. I would say give yourself 4 weeks. In a perfect world, I'd say give yourself 6 weeks so you can kind of deload, not just shock the arms. I don't think a lot of people understand that idea of deloading, where you're in great shape and then all of a sudden you just stop. And this is straight Randy Sullivan. Shout out to Randy Sullivan. Once you're ready to stop anything, there has to be, you did this. So you don't want to just stop. You want your body, it shocks the body. So you want to start to come back down. And even if that only means playing catch 4 or 5 days a week at 70% intent, and then maybe another week of 50% intent, maybe one last week of 30% intent. The idea is you slowly deload the system. And Randy can get way more into detail of the science behind this, but it's very important that you do not shock all these the connectors, all these things that are happening to physiologically get you in shape. You need to unwind it carefully. And so there's a deload period. Let's say even 2 weeks minimum, you deload. Then I'd say, well, you're going to want, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks off of maybe not doing anything, maybe some light band work. Then you're starting from scratch, and that's where you need 4 weeks. So as you can see, this is not necessarily like a 2-week off, 3-week off. You really want to do this right. This is sort of a 6 to 8 week deload, rest, rebuild. Now, you can play with all those different periods and say, well, I don't need as much as this, I don't need as much as that. I'm giving you this scenario of where you want to start from scratch and you're like, I need to, excuse me, I need to rest, and then I need to build up from scratch. And if you want to build up from scratch, I'm just telling you, you don't have to think about it. It's 4 weeks. Now, maybe you can do it in 3, but it's more or less, if you're at least in high school and above, it's 4 weeks. And that's to get to full distance and maybe a good Monday, Wednesday, Friday of pulling down maybe in week 4. And how it looks, so I know that was a lot to say, but it was really important to help people understand that you don't just one day wake up and say, oh, I'm just going to get my arm in shape. I guess you could, but if nothing else, if you want to just say it's going to take you 4 weeks, use your target date to always reverse chain. When do I need to work backward to start the process? Do I need a week or 2 of rest? Do I need a week or 2 of active rest? So that's the formula. Okay, the deload, the rest, the active rest, and the buildup. How you mix and match that, I guess, depends on where you're at in the season or along this path. But I'm going to give you now a very brief overview of what that 4 weeks looks like.
Can I cut you off real quick? Can I cut you off real quickly? So I think that's fantastic. I mean, like I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you just said, because I asked a simple, I say a straightforward question. Hey, what would your buildup look like? And I think it says a lot about you and a lot about your thought process that you didn't just say, hey, day 1, we do this, day 2, we do this, this is week 3, and these are our 4 weeks. You talked about and you thought about, no, it doesn't start on day 1. It starts 4 weeks before day 1. It starts with the deload period, and then it continues into the rest period, if we want to call it that. And then we start the build-up phase. So that's just very important. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just want to make sure people who are listening or watching recognize that you're picking out a target date, you're setting in the future, and you're planning ahead. You don't just wake up and say, okay, today's day one, we're going to start today. It does require some thought, it does require some planning, but that's why the guys you work with and the programs you've created have been so successful, because there's a lot of thought put into it. And again, I apologize for cutting you off, but I just thought that was a really important thing I
Oh,
wanted to make a distinction about, because I think that's valuable information that a lot of people probably miss.
cut me up. First of all, you have you have carte blanche, man. Cut me off anytime because, as I told you before this podcast, you have so much insight and so much to offer and experience. So please jump in any time. I'm glad you stopped at that point. First of all, I was running out of breath. No, but no, it is. I'm glad that that's all you, man, to pick up on that because it's a big deal. And look, when you've been living something for 30 years or whatever it is, that's why when people ask simple questions, I usually come out with a lot of nuances because when you've lived it, when you've guided people through, a fall into a winter, a pro off season, I mean, you can imagine navigating a summer. I mean, that's why I wrote the year-round manual because you have to navigate 12 months, and there's a lot of different scenarios in 12 months, and so it forced me in a good way to get super deep with like a lot of nuance based on a lot of different scenarios. So I'm glad you cut me off because I want people to realize, like you said, because your question is about, let's talk about the 4-week buildup, which is still paramount. But if you don't realize where you're at, whether it's a long spring and a partial summer or not so much in the spring and a long summer, I mean, you still have to figure out if I need to be healthy, strong, and ready for another 3-month roll in the winter, fall into the winter, and that's with my team, I can't miss on that. So I may have to back off some of my summer, that's the question that each person has to ask. Now, you may not have done that much this spring. Your summer may be a relatively light load, so you don't really have to do a ton of backing off and a ton of buildup because you're kind of in shape. That's fine too. But I think when I think of like the optimal buildup, I think about spring training a lot. I think about what is day one when a pitcher or position player shows up to spring training, where they need to be Bruce Lee 10th degree black belt ready to roll, unless you're a 20-year veteran or whatever. I think about day one. So when we talk about high school and college and we talk about September 1st or August 15th or even October 1st, whatever that day is that your coach is wanting you to be in optimal shape and ready to roll and not be vulnerable to breaking down. Well, then to me, I start thinking, yes, the summer's important, but we can't miss on how we show up on that first day of school if the coach expects us. Now, some coaches will say, don't worry, you got a couple weeks with us. We'll get you in shape. We're not going to have you throw high intent day one. That's cool because then that lets you play longer in the summer or gives you a little more time to rest and build up. So I'm glad you pointed that out. And I would say the 4-week part to me is pretty straightforward because first of all, you can refer to our manual, but the formula is really simple. The formula is listening to your arm. At the end of the day, our manual gives you all sorts of suggestions of what day one looks like, day 3, day 7, day 12, day 16. You're probably, based on a lot of experience, you're probably going to be about here and about, it's going to look sort of like that. But they're all suggestions in the manual because the other art of throwing a baseball is learning what it means to listen to your arm and get so intimate with it that it literally tells you where to go each day, which is why I want to make this clear too up front. Eliminate the clock, eliminate time, eliminate how minutes, eliminate how far you think you should throw that day, eliminate counting throws. It's funny, we were talking about counting pros earlier. It's to me, it's all numbers. It's like artificial. It's sort of artificial or synthetic. I want to go to the source. I want to go to your feel, your instincts, your intuition. Mm-hmm. That's what's in charge here. And so maybe it's 11 minutes, and maybe it's 7, and maybe it's 14, and maybe it's 92 feet, maybe it's 108. None of us know, but I do know, based on doing this for a long time, that 3 to 4 week plan will be pretty consistent. But the main thing is, and we're going to use your word from earlier, volume. And maybe I'll end on this so we can move on to other stuff. But week 1 to me, it's all about massage, massage, massage. Loose, relax, massage. Free, arc, height. I want range of motion. We want range of motion. We want freedom. We want what we call low impact massage throws. I use the analogy a lot of a quarterback throwing a screen pass. We want balls with arc. We want the arm to get that range of motion by throwing higher and higher and higher those first couple weeks, which is letting that shoulder stretch out at different angles. So we want those angles. We want that freedom. Those angles, by the way, for your arm, force your body in a good way to get more athletic. Your body creates angles, which is good, right? Variance, we like that idea of variance or variability. It's good for the mind. It opens the mind as you start to throw with more and more angle. So week 1 and 2 is really about these low impact massage throws. Now, it's funny to say this, but you'll find if your 300 feet is your best bolt, you'll find after week 2, you're probably out to, let's say, 200, 220. And if you do this right, and you're doing a lot of band work and other arm care work, and you're doing this diligently, you'll feel like you're making massage throws at 220. I just saw Hunter Green this offseason. I don't mean to name drop, but you watch him at 3+ on his way out making massage throws. And you'll look at him and you can tell he doesn't look like he's trying. And I know the ball, I know he's got a strong arm, and I know the ball's going far. But to me, this is sort of symbolic of what I'm talking about. You'll see that the same massage throw at 80 feet on day 3, where you don't even think you're using any effort, like 15%, you're going to make throws at 200, 220, 250, maybe week 2, and you're going to sense like, this is the weirdest thing. I still feel like I'm throwing, I'm massaging my arm. I'm not really trying. Yeah, maybe you are using 60%, 70%, but that's the mentality. And by the way, Zan, that is the mentality out to your furthest throw, which I will say the average player, unless you're 12 or 13, where 200 might be your max, you'll get there faster, of course. But let's say someone who's got a strong arm that's in high school, will get out to 300 feet. I'd say probably by the end of week 3, if they're doing this right, they'll not only get out to 300 feet or whatever their max distance is, but they'll be able to stay out there for 5 or 8 throws without, petering out. Now, last thing I'll say is this on this topic. We've done so many camps that we know that the time to start pulling down and start making those higher intent throws will come about this point. This is sort of the magic moment of, people will say, when do I know to pull down? When do I start getting more aggressive? Here's the answer. When someone gets out to their peak throw, and then the next time they go out and throw, they're making 3 to 5, and the next time they go out and throw, they probably will go further than 300 feet, but they're starting to do 8 to 10. To me, once I see someone making multiple throws at their max distance, that is sort of like the green light. Not that they can't pull down on the way in with medium pace, but that's the green light for me when it's like, hey, you're ready to get after it. Now, I would say this, week 4 is when it will tend to happen. And we'll still tell guys, just like the first few days of playing catch, hey, we're going to pull down, even though you're ready to throw 100% because you're at 100% distance. Let's go 80 to 90%, maybe 80% the first couple pull downs, maybe 90% on Friday. Now week 5 to me is the horse is out of the barn. Now it's pretty much a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, full distance, full pull down. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, you're just filling in with, how far do I want to go? You're probably not pulling down at all on those other days very much, unless you're a position player and you don't have to worry about bullpens. Then it starts to become one of those things where you pretty much stretch it out during week 4, and you pretty much pull down just about every day, and then you gauge what you need or don't need based on, what you're doing that day.
Sure. That's really good info. And I off the top of my head, I've got a couple of follow-up questions.
Yes.
The first one though is so I've watched your DVDs. I mean, we talk. I follow your stuff. I actually bought year-round throwing. I think I bought it twice. I think I bought it whenever it came out, and then I couldn't find my copy, so I literally bought it again last week. So I know what you're talking about. I know your terminology, but I'm sure there's somebody out there listening that may have heard the term pull down before. And just to make sure we get the accurate definition from the person who coined it, what, as you're talking about pull downs, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, what are you calling a pull down?
Gotcha. Great point. I don't know if I've actually coined it. Maybe we've popularized it. I don't know where that came from, but I can tell you this: we've been saying pull down since probably 1990.
I think it came from you. I'm giving you credit.
I don't know. I think I'll tell you what. I've told the story before. People say, "How did you get into long toss?" And before I went to Cal State North, it was at Pierce Junior College. There was a guy. I had a relatively strong arm for my size and everything else, but there was a pitcher there who was like our leader. He was like a captain, and he sort of helped me formulate, because I think I just would throw it far, and I don't think I pulled down, so to speak, correctly. I think I just went as far as I could, and then I just probably played burnout like most people probably did.
Mm-hmm.
But he was the first person to say, which is the answer to what a pull down is. He was the first person I can remember, and this goes back to, I'm not exaggerating, this goes back to maybe is this possible? 84? 80, hold on a second, maybe 83. Is that possible? That's 38 years ago, which is amazing because I'm only 41. That's a shout out to Sheets on that one. He said, when you come back in, because I got out far, I definitely wanted to air it out. That's another thing about long toss. I've always wondered when some of these other programs came out about throwing the ball on a line or very restricted. Intuitively, it always did this to me, because to me, throwing the ball far and high is very intuitive. It's very liberating. It's very freeing. Not to mention it feels good.
Mm-hmm.
So he said to me, he goes, when you come back in, which we came in at maybe 10 feet of throw, that's arbitrary. It just gives you a chance to gauge your release point, maybe most ideally, is because even 10 feet of throw within 20 throws, you're pretty close. He said, maintain here. That was a long way of getting to the answer. Sorry.
That's okay.
He said, maintain the intent of your furthest throw as you move closer to your throwing partner. And I'm telling you right now, from teaching this forever, it's an art form, because no matter how many times you tell it to somebody, what they tend to do until you drill them hard enough, or you get them competitive enough, is they're going to tend to decelerate, even if it's a little bit. And the reason why is that, there's a few reasons. One is that they don't want to launch their partner and play chase, because that doesn't look good. Number two, as an athlete, you want to hit your partner in the chest, so to speak, right? Three, the closer you get, you don't have practice at this. This is like an art form, like maintaining full intent, because again, the ball is going to tend to go over your partner's head unless you've had training in this. So because there's no real practice at this, it's a new thing. So pulling down is really as basic as this. It's maintaining not that it's every day you pull down, but the days you pull down, it's maintaining the intent of your furthest throw all the way back into your throwing partner. And another way of saying this is that if 300 feet equals X, you have to maintain X all the way in. And I guarantee you, if you do this with someone for the first time, that it's hard to see much from 300 to 200 feet. But you start getting around 200 feet, especially like 150 and in, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. And it still may look like a pretty good pull down, because maybe they are using 250 feet of it. There's 85%. So it's still firm and it looks good. It's not a pull down. And it's actually not helping to optimize your arm strength. And it's actually not helping to optimize your accuracy. Because until you maintain X, that mind-body connection, that self or auto-regulation, whatever it's called, self-regulation, that feel, there's a little bit, what I like to call mixed muscle memory. It's close, But if you told me every single time I'm throwing at 300 feet, I'm throwing at 300 feet, no matter where I'm at, especially if I get to one spot and stay there, I'm going to start to develop some accuracy and some repeatability because I have these constants. I'm maintaining 300 feet. Maybe I'm picking a spot, the same spot every time, my partner's feet, because I know 300 feet at 200 feet, if I aim for the feet, equals the chest. But the point is that to do a pull down correctly, first of all, let me give everybody out there one hint. Aim 50 feet in front of your throwing partner when you get about 150 and in, because the tendency is going to be to launch your partner. And that peace of mind to say, oh, I can miss low, I can long hop them. But most people will even have a hard time with that, because what happens is as you go out to 300 feet this way and you start building this, which is what we want, to on flat ground without the support of a decline, to get over that front side takes a lot of work. By the way, it also promotes great mechanics, because in order for you to figure out how to take 300 feet back here and start to get it out here, let me get to my camera here, you have to organize the body in an optimal way. You have to be relaxed, you have to be quiet, you have to be well balanced, and you have to figure out, how do I let my release point get out in front without beating myself to the punch? So that was some bonus information from a pull down, but pull down is basically maintaining the intent of your furthest throw.
Well, no, I think that's a great explanation. I think there's a lot of times that, in life, in the baseball world, especially, people regurgitate terms. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who have said, hey, we're going to do a pull down, but they don't really know what it means or what it is. So I think it's helpful just to hear you explain where it came from and what it means to you. So one of the other, yeah,
sorry, and I know I'm sorry to interrupt you. One thing I do want to say about pull downs, which I have changed, our philosophy is changed a bit, because there are more studies out there now. I think that you're actually, flat ground is harder on your arm and maybe even throwing up a mound, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say this, and your legs become so important with pull downs and getting a good crow hop the right way, which you can find on our videos on YouTube. But basically it's crow hopping off of your back leg, right-handed off the right leg, left hand off the left leg. But I would say this, from about your max throw, let's say 300 feet, maybe into 150, I'm actually good with like what I would call more 80% pull downs. I really want those pull downs to start maybe even at 120, because you're minimizing the real hard exertion on flat ground. You're waiting till you get to 120, where now you can really get those legs up and you can get some height and you can get down and through without, feeling like you're throwing uphill with all this force. So I would say maybe cruise into your pull downs to like 150, 120 if you're a 300 foot person. Then is that last 120, especially that last 90 feet, is when you really want to test it, because that to me is when you start feeling the bingo and the magic of translating all this uphill distance into this downhill distance. And people ask a lot of times, where does arm strength come from? Well, one of the places arm strength comes from, which is free every day, that people I don't think really understand, is when you start learning to pull down correctly and train the arm to speed up rather than decelerate. That is training a new action in your arm and in your body to support more velocity.
Well, like I said, I definitely appreciate you clarifying that, because that is good info, and that's some of the things that it's an important part of the program, obviously. And I want to make sure people who are listening or who have read your stuff, they're understanding what that means and what they're supposed to do. But I do kind of want to go back to one of the things that I've heard you say a number of times. I'm sure you've probably tweeted it a ton of times. I think you said earlier today, and the comment is listen to your arm. And I couldn't agree more with that. One of the questions that I get a lot, and one of the things that I try to help players learn and differentiate between, is I think a lot of young players in particular aren't great at determining the difference between soreness, fatigue, and injury. They just know their arm feels different. Like, oh man, I throw and something doesn't feel right. when really nothing may be wrong because you just played a doubleheader yesterday. Or maybe it's that college freshman who's being exposed to a lot more volume of throwing than they're used to, and their arm feels different than it's felt before, when it's just a little bit of soreness and maybe they need a little more rest or more band work. But there's a couple things, like I said, soreness, fatigue, and injury that I think some players have a hard time differentiating between. And I don't know if any person can tell someone else exactly how to judge that. But as you're talking with players and you're teaching players to listen to their arm, and that's what you're teaching them and telling them, what advice would you give to somebody who is maybe a younger athlete and they're trying to start, listening to their arm, but they don't really know how to read the different signals that the arm is sending them?
Wow, that's a good question. Number one, I'm going to start out with a famous line: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, or an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. And I'm going to go back to something I said earlier, which is you have to beat this to the punch. If you get into unbelievable throwing shape, your arm will tend to get stronger, or at least maintain its health, endurance, recovery. I know it sounds almost too good to be true, but you get into a bubble, rhythm, where your arm just feels good. Now, I'm not saying there aren't going to be days it might feel a little tired or a little sore, but usually that would flush out the next day if you have a great base and you're in what we call beast mode. Now, with that said, if someone who doesn't have a great base, or something just happened, which is possible, catcher comes up throwing off balance, whatever, and tweaks something a little bit. So I would say this: fatigue to me is probably the best thing. It just means you're not in great condition, but there's no real danger. It doesn't feel like anything's a problem. Soreness and pain are the two bingos, right? Soreness is something that usually, if it's just soreness, you'll throw through it. Now, maybe you need to take a day or two off, or three, and just do lots of bands and really recondition and do a lot of low impact. There's that term again, low impact massage throwing. And you might have to baby that over a few days to build up distance and first build up volume, then distance. But if it's soreness, you will tend to throw through it relatively fast. You just might have to be super smart and back off, which a lot of people have a hard time doing, understandably so, because we want to play. Pain to me is the bingo. If you have pain, that is your body yelling at you, as you know, Zan, and screaming, back off. Something I did a video about not too long ago. I don't know if enough athletes really get this, or coaches, or I don't want to put this on coaches or athletes. I'm just going to say I think this is just normal in life. When you are hurt, you want to get back on the field as soon as you can. We all do. But if you are in pain, not only do you have to back off, but you have to do what I call eliminate the calendar. Forget about if you have a game coming up, a season coming up, a tournament coming up, a pre-draft workout coming up. Everything is eliminated immediately. The only thing that matters is your body and your arm. And so pain for me is something where if you back off and you notice that it's not aggravating the situation, well, maybe you're back into soreness and you can throw through it. But if you notice there's any aggravation, as you know, you just have to back off, and you can go out again and try it. As long as you can throw or do whatever you need to do in a way that you're not aggravating or irritating it. Let's say it goes down, the pain. You might be able to baby through that, and then it's sort of like soreness, and just work through it. And it might take longer because you're in pain. But as you know, if you're in pain and really minimal things aggravate it, it's time to shut down, see a doctor, a physical therapist, and accept the fact that something is wrong in your arm. And it may take a week, and it might take 2 months, but you have to obey it. But the point is that soreness is something you probably can throw through relatively fast. Pain is something that is a real red flag. And so yes, being able to listen to your arm and know the difference between those three, it's a game changer, because if you don't know those three well and you mistake pain for soreness and you try to go out and play on it, you might have Tommy John the next day, right? You might have a career ending or career threatening injury simply because you didn't know the difference between pain and soreness or fatigue. And so I think, Zan, it's a critical question to ask and throw out there. So I hope that that answers the question.
No, it does, and it is a hard question to answer. So, I put you on the spot, but I think just as athletes, as we progress, one of the things that I try to teach the guys that I work with is we have to have a high body IQ. We have to have a high level of self-awareness,
Mhm.
and that's something that it doesn't come as naturally to some as it does to others. But I think that the more conscious and the more intentional we can be about trying to learn our body, about trying to gain body. The term I use is body IQ, or like I said, self awareness. But the more intentional we can be about trying to do that, and the better off we'll be. For example, so not to plug, I try not to plug any of my products or anything about this. This is all about you and getting your thoughts. But I guess it was about a year and a half ago I released the throwing journal, and the entire purpose of the throwing journal was to helpfully help players write down their thoughts, write down what they're doing, write notes about how they feel, so they can become more conscious and more aware of what's actually going on inside their body. It's not just write down, hey, I made 33 throws today. Tomorrow I made 55 throws. It's to say, okay, well, man, I had a really heavy long toss yesterday. Today my arm felt like this. Yesterday was an off day. I've had light throwing the past week. Now my arm feels great. So I can flip back and say, oh, wow, I start to see a trend, and you start to maybe gain some of that body awareness or body IQ. So that was kind of the purpose of that. So again, not trying to plug the throwing journal, but I absolutely, the reason I say it is because I absolutely wholeheartedly agree that the better off we can be about understanding our bodies and learning and listening to the arm, I think we're just going to be better off as athletes, and we'll be um, a lot better off health wise because of it, performance and health wise.
Yeah, and you're not. I I had to get over this a long time ago, and I'm not great at it either. But it's not plugging anything. What you're doing is you're providing information. It's really a gift, um, because it changes careers, it changes lives. So um, even though I'm not great at it, I think at the end of the day, if we plug a book or a manual or something we've done that we put our heart and soul into to make a difference in someone's life, um, so I wholeheartedly say plug away. And look, you spent a lot of time and effort, and you put your heart and soul into making a difference in people's lives. So I'm with you. And by the way, I'm going to steal that one. At some point, you will see a tweet over the next few days, and I will source you, man. High body IQ. I've never heard that before, and I love that term. It just hits you between the eyes. There's no gray area. You don't need to really have to talk a lot about that. Do you have a high body IQ? I mean, that's powerful, man. Thank you. I knew one thing I knew on this podcast today, besides hanging out with you, would be fun. But I knew I'd get better, and I will continue to get better because of you. So thanks.
Well, man, I appreciate you saying that. I really do. It means a lot. You
Yeah, the
know,
truth.
well, thanks. I'm learning stuff. I got pages full of notes here too, so I'm learning a lot from you as well. But we have been on here about an hour, and I think, like I said in the beginning, I feel 100% confident I could go another 2.5 hours with you, and we still probably wouldn't scratch the surface in all the areas that I wanted to talk about. But I definitely want to shift over a little bit. While we spent most of the last hour or so talking about throwing and throwing programs and listening to the arm and all that sort of stuff. I know another area of the game that you're super passionate about is the mental game, and I know you've written a lot about it before. Actually, at the ABCA convention, I've gone in and done the yoga or the meditation with you, and I know when we spoke the other day, you said over the past number of weeks you've been writing a lot more about the mental game. So that's what's on your mind lately. So I'd love to kind of just open up the floor. I don't know if there's one specific area of the mental game that you're super passionate about or you want to talk about, but maybe what have you been doing lately, or what's on your mind, and kind of how can we relate that to the people who are listening?
Yeah, I would say, look, whatever position you play, whatever sport you're in, really whatever walk of life. I think as coaches, we all sort of, since we've been down this road, or parents, it's easy for us to throw out terms like the game's 90% mental or more. I don't think you'd have anybody in professional baseball disagree with you, or professional sports, that wouldn't say it's probably closer to 99% between the lines. Now, this doesn't mean you don't have to do a lot of work and preparation. Of course you do. But once the preparation is done, now the uniform's on and you're between the lines, what percentage of the game is mental? I've just always felt like at the moment of truth, it's going to be 99% at the highest level. It's going to be probably 90 to 95% in college baseball. It's going to probably be 75 to 90% in high school. So if we just take those numbers, just ask a follow-up question, which is, okay, well, what percentage of my day or week am I spending on mental game preparation? We know what physical game preparation looks like. And we know we spend, I'm going to make up a number with including the gym, 40 hours, 50 hours a week on physical practice. Oh, that might be a lot. Whatever the number is, let's call it 40 hours a week, including the weekend. Of 40 hours, I mean, how much time are you spending on breathing, relaxing, clearing your mind, meditating, yoga? What just looking at the ocean or the mountains, just getting quiet, because the zone state is about being in a state of quietness. There's a lot of things about the zone state, but one of them is just being quiet. So we know our best game comes from being quiet or being clear or being relaxed. These are all skills. Why would we not prepare those skills or develop those skills, just like hit and running, and holding runners on or whatever, bullpens, BP. We do all of that because that's a practice. So I think my one overview statement would be, if you're a player, and first I would do this more for life, because life is always there, right? We're athletes in life. So life is the macro. So I would say this more about life. If you want to be more relaxed, less stressed, more clear-minded, more free, more peaceful, and I can go on for about another 100 terms. Well, the idea is, then why wouldn't you practice and work on that? So step one, I'd say, is just being aware that this is out there, aware that, oh, I can listen to videos, or I can read books, or I can go on YouTube and Google or keyword breathing exercises, or visualization. And all of a sudden I can start to become a student of that part of the game too, which is, again, life. And I know we mentioned this earlier, but Sheets and I did with Stick and Ball TV. I know it's super long, but he and I, like you and I, it could have been 5 hours. And look, if you take a class at school, or you take an online class, it's 40 hours or whatever it is, 60 hours, 80 hours. So yes, this is 2 hours and 48 minutes, but it's a deep dive into the mental game. It's a deep dive into mental practice, mental training. How do you do it? So I'd say those are my two big takeaways, is one, to be aware that this mental game is there and to start becoming a student of it. And two, apply. And the ways you can apply is, again, start checking out resources. We have plenty of free resources. Just start looking into things like, what can I practice every day to clear my mind, to relax my mind, to relax my body, and so on. And I just feel like once you just are aware of this and know there are things to do, that's step one. And then for the coaches out there, I would say, look, you have these kids coming to you from school. We just came through COVID. There's obviously a lot of stuff going on out there regarding mental health. And I would say, as a coach, not trying to guilt any coaches here, but do some homework yourself and really learn about this. And we have a really simple 10-minute breathing exercise. We go through it again on that sheet, on that podcast with Sheets. But try to create a forum and a safe place for when your kids come there. Maybe you spend 5 or 10 minutes with them, not once in a while, every day, just deloading, relaxing, clearing their mind, teaching them about breathing, teaching about what it means to be present, teaching them what it means when thoughts come in their minds that are maybe stressing them out or distracting them about the future and the past, that you teach them how to be neutral and not engage thinking. That I'll leave it on that, and I'll turn it back to you for any follow-ups. But if I could teach somebody one skill in life for their mental well-being, this is across everything, sports, life, it might be this tool of what's called neutrality. And what neutrality means, it comes from the root word neutral. And it means if thoughts come on your mind, and we know, I think the research out there says we have on average, the average human being has like 70,000 thoughts a day, which is ironic if you contrast that with being in the zone is thought less. Mm-hmm. So think about that contrast. So if we have thoughts running in our minds, and these thoughts are talking about everything, anything, the future, the past, fears, worries. I mean, they could be positive thoughts too, don't get me wrong, but if we go into thoughts that are negative or worrying, and this tool is called neutral, meaning, well, if a thought comes up like, man, this guy owns me. If the next thought, so to speak, is, which isn't really a thought, it's more of an observation, is that I'm watching that thought, but I'm not going to take the dance with that thought. I'm not going to engage it. I'm not going to go into that story. I'm just going to back off, stay neutral, take a deep breath, and then come back to, which is the other huge piece of what we teach. We teach mental practice is the primary, but very close is mental game strategy. And this is also paramount. They both go together. The mental game strategy we teach by far after 31 years is called being in the process. So now, if you're able to be neutral to a negative thought about anything, maybe you feel like there's someone in the stands that's distracting you, a scout. Boom. Be neutral. Don't go into that thought. Don't engage it. But now take a breath and now come back to my process. So you're directing your mind where you want to go. So a process for a hitter might be see the ball well and hit it hard. A process for the pitcher might be see the glove and attack it, or see my focal point and attack it. Whatever your process is, you have a different process for a secondary lead. You have a different process for blocking balls. You have a different process for a 7-foot putt. But the idea is that when a thought comes up that's distracting you theoretically or taking you somewhere else, take a breath, brings you back to where you are. And then the second term is redirect your attention to your process or wherever you want to go. That's intentional. That's promoting your plan or promoting your approach. So that would be sort of like a good overview of like, be aware of there's a practice, the meditation, the relaxation, the breathing. But also be aware that there's the strategy in the game and in life. You can apply this to the classroom. You're starting to think about lunch. You're starting to think about whatever, your game today. When you really want to be present and you want to listen well with what your professor or teacher is saying so you can take great notes. So a thought comes in, distracts you. Take a breath and say, no, I'm going to redirect my attention. Where do I need to be? I need to be here. Be a great listener. So I hope in that little bit of a mishmash smorgasbord, people can at least take that. And again, between the Sheets podcast, we have a 45-minute talk also on YouTube, keyword Jaeger, mental talk. And it goes through a lot of what we just talked about more in depth. But I appreciate you giving me a forum to at least throw some stuff out there. And then, if you had but if you had a question or follow-up, I know we'll keep this to a minimum, but at least as an overview, I hope that hits some bells.
Well, I think that's good. In my opinion, a lot of people don't always have the most awareness of what's going on around them. And that's why I know you're huge into meditation. Some people have other mental practices, whatever you want to call it. That's fine. But being able to recognize that, oh, I have this negative thought. I don't have to spiral out of control. I don't have to go down that path. I can recognize it as a thought or a feeling or an emotion, and then almost have I hate to say an outer body experience, but just recognize it for what it is, and then redirect and start back on, the path that you want to be on. You've talked about Sheets a number of times, and he's actually one of my good friends, and we were good mutual friends. This past fall, if just people listening again, I don't want to take anything for granted. Jeremy Sheetinger's the head baseball coach at Georgia Gwinnett College. They just won the NAIA national championship. He runs the podcast for Stick and Ball TV. He used to be with ABCA. Most people listening probably know of him or have heard of him on social media. But anyway, circling back around, last fall, I went and spent a couple of days with him one weekend and watched the team scrimmage and just hung out with him for a couple of days. And I just asked him, I was like, hey man, just be straight with me. Like I see on Twitter, you're tweeting out pictures of your team. Everybody's lying down on their back. They're meditating. They're taking their personal time. I was like, are you really bought into this? Is this for show? What is it? He was like, Zan, this might be the most important thing we do. Our players absolutely love it. And I know you're friends with him, and I think a lot of what he does, he's taken from you or has been influenced by you. So again, he's got a lot of great players. He's a great coach, but he's also doing a lot of good things that he's learned from you, implementing the things that you're talking about. And again, I don't think he would hesitate to say that has definitely played a role in their team's success. Yes, they have talented players and good kids and all that sort of stuff, but this thing, what you're talking about absolutely helps them, throughout their process. So I'm glad you brought that up, and I just wanted to share that with you because I think a lot of people see the tweets, or they see pictures of his team doing that or another team doing that, and they're probably scratching their head thinking, like, come on, is this guy for real? Like, they're taking 10 minutes out of their practice day to lie and like feel the grass touching their bodies. But really, you mentioned it earlier, man, how much of the mental game do we just overlook or not pay attention to? And I think it's important. That's why I love reading your tweets, and I love reading what you write. And I've watched the video you're talking about online. And anybody who's looking for more information on that, we can definitely direct them to that Stick and Ball podcast with Sheets, where y'all do the 3-hour deep dive, Joe Rogan style.
Well, listen, Sheets says it best, every single day. I met up with them when they were in Santa Barbara, and they meditate every day there. They meditate every day in Lewiston. They're guys, I truly believe it. They live it. They love it. It's a essential part of their day. And I think Jeremy has seen himself also get into a much more meditative state from walking the guys through it every day. He already has a great culture. So the terms he uses in his culture, like trust and family and love, that's a huge part of it. But every day he's talking about breathing and relaxation and letting go and trust and support and free and flowing and all these things. And I guess I'm just really glad you brought this up, because I just want coaches out there to realize, and Jeremy and I, man, we get goosebumps now, because as you probably are seeing, we're just getting more and more coaches showing, posting photos or videos of taking their kids through a meditation or laying down. And look, at the end of the day, it's real. It's just it's like, again, it's fly balls, ground balls, it's first and third rundowns. It's just the mind, which happens to be the engine of the car. And we're just stopping and we're saying, hey guys, look, yeah, there's a lot of physical things we want to get to too. But look, we want to optimize how those physical things go today. So why would we not want to get you as quiet and clear and relaxed and happy and free and peaceful and prepared as possible? And you said it best. For Jeremy, this is a way of life now. And for me, I love it, because I feel like he is really helping to spread the word out there of the importance of mental practice. Because look, at the end of the day, this is mental health, and this is mental well-being. And get to your kids as early as you can and start giving them this experience, because maybe I'll leave you on this note. One of the greatest payoffs I get in my life to this day is someone who went through a meditation at a young age with me or at some point, and they can talk about how this pertains to their life. You know, maybe they're not playing baseball anymore. Maybe they're a father, mother, or whatever. And I just think that at the end of the day, that's our ultimate reward with these kids, right? Is yes, we're developing them as athletes, but we're developing them, of course, as people first. And with all the stuff going on in the world today with social media and with coming out of COVID, it's like, I just think this, I don't want to use the word desperate, but I feel like this is really, really needed. I feel like that this is just, it's not an add-on to me. It's really it's a prerequisite, in my opinion, to your practice plan. And that's, I hope people start looking at, this is my part of my practice plan today, not an add-on.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really well said, and I think it's a good message, and I'm glad to see more people implementing things like that into their program, and I think that's one of the trends that's going to continue over the next number of years. But Alan, man, like I said, I want to respect your time. We've been on here almost an hour and 20 minutes, and I definitely appreciate everything you had to say, and appreciate you sharing your wisdom and knowledge with everybody. I will post your links on the screen so everybody can find you on social media if they haven't already, and then your website and other resources as well. But Alan, man, always enjoy talking to you. Like I said, I've got a page full of notes that I could go all day. So, man, appreciate your time. We'll let you get back to your day, but anytime you want to come back on, you're welcome to go for part 2.
Well, first of all, look, man, I don't say this lightly, but it's an honor to be on with you. I have so much respect and appreciation for what you do. I know how passionate, I know how much you care, and I knew it, and it of course happened. You know, I got better today as a result of being with you. And so, thank you for having me on, and thanks again for just your care and your passion about teaching.
No problem at all, man. Glad to be able to call you a friend. So enjoyed all the information you shared, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Me and ditto. I'm glad I can call you a friend, because you're a great dude, man. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon, buddy.
Thanks, Al.